Vamos en vivo en aproximadamente tres segundos, Diego.
Iniciamos inmediatamente, ¿no?
Estamos en vivo, Diego.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Before we begin, we would like to request our audience to keep your microphones off so we avoid any interruption. So good afternoon once again to those who are tuning in from local areas, and good evening and else to those who are probably joining us from different time zones. It is a true pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán. We are virtually gathered today to mark the beginning of the long-awaited and highly anticipated 12th International Conference for Teachers of English, Language Teaching during COVID-19. The main purpose of this event is to provide training to teachers of English, exchange classroom learned lessons, and share results of recent research done in the field. The Foreign Languages Department at our institution, along with the organizing committee, has been working with such a great effort and energy in order to provide a fruitful experience for our national and first-time international audience. We would like to thank the presence of authorities, presenters, and special guests. We have a lot to cover today. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Hermes Aldovín Díaz Luna, President of Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán, to come forward and start with some opening remarks. Señor Rector, sea bienvenido. Escuchamos atentos sus palabras. We cannot hear you, Mr. President.
Ok, lo siento. Muy buenas tardes a todos los presentes. Quiero expresarles a ustedes mis mejores deseos de éxito y bienestar. Distinguida señora Alejandra Báez, representante de la Oficina de Asuntos Públicos de la Embajada Americana, estimada jefa del Departamento de la Enseñanza de Lenguas, Máster María Luz Gómez, apreciada presidenta de la conferencia, la doctora Gloria Ulloa, distinguida doctora Joyce Kling, oradora principal de este evento, apreciadas autoridades y colegas de la Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán, distinguidos conferencistas e invitados y presentadores nacionales e internacionales, distinguidos representantes de instituciones educativas y organizaciones gubernamentales y no gubernamentales, estimadas autoridades docentes y estudiantes de nuestro Departamento de Lenguas, estimados amigos de los medios de comunicación, distinguidos especiales, invitados. Sean todos bienvenidos a este evento en el que cada 2 años nos reunimos para dignificar la carrera docente en la enseñanza del inglés y para actualizar conocimientos en el campo de la práctica profesional. Quiero extender mis felicitaciones a los comités organizadores de esta conferencia internacional para profesores de inglés, que durante 3 días desarrollarán un espacio de reflexión continua sobre las prácticas docentes durante esta pandemia que ha afectado la población mundial. El desarrollo de esta conferencia es una muestra más de que los procesos académicos en la Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán no se han detenido con la pandemia y que el acompañamiento a nuestros estudiantes, graduados y educadores de inglés se ha mantenido por medio de estrategias puntuales que han sido gestionadas desde el Departamento de Inglés de nuestra universidad. Agradezco profundamente a la Embajada Americana de los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica, nuestro patrocinador, por el apoyo y el trabajo conjunto de alta calidad con nuestra carrera de inglés. También quiero agradecer a la Asociación Fulbright Honduras, ya que se ha puesto a favor de la Universidad Pedagógica sus talentos y su apoyo incondicional en el desarrollo de esta conferencia. También extiendo una mención muy respetuosa a organizaciones nacionales e internacionales como Macmillan, Richmond, Oxford y a la Secretaría de Educación de nuestro país, quienes con su oportuno acompañamiento y gestión han contribuido al desarrollo de nuestra carrera. Es mi deseo que los objetivos de este evento, que van desde fortalecer los lazos profesionales que nos unen hasta el diseño de un sistema de comunicación interinstitucional, se alcance con el mejor de los niveles y que los participantes sientan que el compartir sus experiencias permitirá un aprendizaje nuevo para todos. Las buenas prácticas deben de ser reconocidas. Asimismo, demos paso a los momentos de catarsis en donde nuestra parte emocional, una inteligencia que debemos cultivar, puede también ser escuchada. Saludo muy efusivamente a las autoridades, a los docentes y estudiantes del Departamento de Inglés, quienes han logrado desarrollar esta conferencia con diversas instituciones unidas por la inevitable fuerza de los idiomas y que hemos denominado la enseñanza del lenguaje durante la COVID-19. En el marco de este gran evento, yo quiero invitarles a todos ustedes, a los docentes y estudiantes, hablantes del inglés, a enfrentar esta nueva era. Es nuestro deber docente crear y aplicar estrategias innovadoras en la enseñanza de las lenguas. Demos paso a la creatividad y a la motivación para que el manejo de las mismas sea una herramienta por excelencia en el proceso de comunicación y que nos permita enfrentar los retos lingüísticos, sociales y culturales en el siglo XXI que nos depara. Es para mí un honor reiterarles la más cordial bienvenida a esta casa de estudios que siempre está abierta para todos ustedes. Y en este marco académico y con altas expectativas de cambio y de un mejoramiento continuo de la calidad educativa en la enseñanza del inglés. Doy por inaugurada la 12ª Conferencia Internacional para Profesores de Inglés. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Sean cordialmente bienvenidos.
Thank you to our president, Dr. Hermes Diaz, for these welcoming words. It is now my privilege to introduce Alejandra Baez, Cultural Affairs Officers from the United States Embassy. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Dr. Hermes Alduvín Díaz, Rector, Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán, Professor María Luz Gómez, Head of the Language Department, Dr. Gloria Ulloa, President of the English Conference, distinguished guests, conference presenters, and the wonderful English language teachers who empower our students to learn English and are also developing the next generation of global leaders. I am honored to be here today to participate in the opening ceremony of the 12th National Conference for Teachers of English, organized by one of our distinguished key partners in promoting English language learning in Honduras, the National Pedagogical University Francisco Morazán. During the COVID-19 pandemic, teachers quickly demonstrated the type of courageous leadership that is needed in times of crises, making tremendous efforts in the development of your students in their pursuits of English language learning. You did not only provide that sense of normalcy and well-being that our students needed, but also opened the doors to new opportunities in their future. Now, as we prepare to return to the classroom, whether hybrid or completely in person, you need to continue to empower yourself and your students to build our collective resilience to meet and overcome the challenges before us and build better communities and futures in this beautiful country. As you continue to adapt to the accelerated pace and intensity of change, leading your students and experimenting with social media, digital platforms, and traditional teaching methods, we hope that this conference provides you with the best resources and practices to adapt them in the changing landscape of the new classroom, and to continue to be the finest teachers for today's students. Thank you to our Regional English Language Officer in Mexico, Dr. David Fay, and to our English language specialists, keynote speaker, Dr. Joyce Kling, and Dr. Lurin Erica Saito for sharing their expertise, hands-on training, and resources for virtual teaching and social emotional learning. They are fine examples of the rich academic tradition we try to share with our partners in the region. I also want to thank and congratulate the organizing committee for the extraordinary work they have done to put this conference together. Thank you, Dr. Hermes Diaz-Alduvin, Rector of UPN-FM, and his team for hosting this conference. UPN-FM is one of our most valued partners in promoting English language learning in Honduras. And we are proud to have several Fulbright-Lasbaugh alumni serving in this university, including Dr. Diaz and Dr. Gloria Ulloa. Finally, I want to leave you with this quote from American writer William Arthur Ward. "Teaching is more than imparting knowledge. It is inspiring change," end quote. So go forth and remain courageous in inspiring change in the next generation of global leaders and adapting your English teaching to the current environment. Know that the United States will always remain a partner in your pursuits. Thank you.
Thank you for these wonderful and heartfelt words. Moving right along, it is now my pleasure to introduce Professor Maria Luz Gomez, Head of the Languages Department. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank and acknowledge the presence of the President of the Universidad Pedagógica Nacional, Francisco Morazán, Dr. Hermes Alduvin Diaz, the Cultural Affairs Officer, USA Embassy Representative, Mrs. Alejandra Baez, the President of this year's Organizing Committee, Dr. Gloria Ulloa, all the local authorities, all national and international presenters, and all the participants that are here with us today. On behalf of the Teaching of Languages Department, we welcome you to the 12th International Conference for Teachers of English. Through the international conferences, the Languages Teaching Department updates all our English teachers with the latest innovations and language teaching trends. Last year, as well as this year, we try to focus on the adaptation processes that we face due to the coronavirus pandemic. The students who attend our classrooms today bring new challenges and new ways of approaching knowledge. Society, parents, and students demand more from us. Answers to teaching questions are to be given every day. There is no time to blink, but to be proactive and to be immersed in new proposals to vary our teaching style. Success won't come by itself. Now, more than ever, planning a class seems to be orchestrating the use of tools, methods, strategies, materials, and much more. I'm certain to say that we are ready to face what it comes. It is an honor for us to have you as part of our conference. Welcome again to this wonderful academic event. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Maria Luz Gomez, for those inspiring words. Dear audience, please join me in welcoming Dr. Gloria Ulloa, President of the English Conference, who also wishes to deliver some remarks.
Dr. Hermes Alduvin Diaz, President of Universidad Pedagógica Nacional Francisco Morazán, Ms. Alejandra Baez, USA Embassy Public Affairs Officer, Ms. Maria Luz Gomez, Head of the Languages Department, special guest, English specialists, teachers of English from more than 15 countries all over the world. Today is a great day for our department, for our university, and for teachers in Honduras, since more than 15 countries are joining us for our 12th International Conference for Teachers of English. In 2009, the Cultural Affairs section opened its door to the English program and gave a yes when we requested their support and sponsorship to have a national conference. Back then, we had no idea what to organize a conference was like. However, Carla Castañeda, Carmen Urcullo, and Mr. Adams did not hesitate and believed we could have a conference, and they supported us. Even though the conference was organized for the Honduran teachers of English, most of the teachers who attended the conference were just from Tegucigalpa back then. Later, as the years passed, teachers from all over the country started coming. We went from 300 teachers to 2,000 teachers this year. And after 10 conferences, we went from being a national conference to become an international conference. We have gone a long way. The path has not been easy, but we always believed that we could go beyond our borders. And now we have gone all the way to the other side of the ocean. We went from having 7 presenters and being super happy with those 7 presenters to have presenters from 14 different countries this time and being super, super, super happy. We would like to welcome our presenters who are here to share their expertise with us. We want to welcome the teachers from the different countries that have heard about our conference and are connected with us at this moment. We want to welcome each 100 teacher who registered to be a part of this conference and who were the reason to have a conference 20 some years ago. We want to hug all of you and tell you that this is your conference. This is our time. We are creative. We have overcome problems. COVID-19 did not stop us and is not going to stop us. So now let's get ready to have a great time and welcome everybody to our 12th International Conference for Teachers of English.
And after these inspiring remarks from Dr. Gloria Ulloa, President of the English Conference, we come to the end of our opening ceremony. But before we go, a few reminders for all of you. You can follow the development of our conference through our social media. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. Please feel free to explore the content we have for you there. As for the attendance to each session, make sure you click on the time heading to enter conference rooms and don't miss out on any of the enriching presentations we have as part of our conference. We reiterate our gratitude to the authorities, special guests, and our audience for attending this ceremony. You may follow the program and remain in this session for the opening plenary. Have a pleasant day, and let's make of this 12th International Conference for Teachers of English a massive success. Have a good one. So we'll just wait for a few minutes before we start with the plenary.
Estamos listos, Diego, para que presente.
Perfecto. So once again, good afternoon. Hello, dear attendees. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all into this first plenary as part of our 12th International Conference for Teachers of English, Language Teaching during COVID-19. Thank you for your participation. Today, I have the honor to introduce Dr. Joyce Kling from the University of Copenhagen. Dr. Joyce Kling is an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. Her research interests include English medium instruction, teacher cognition, and language testing. She has published in several edited volumes in journals in these areas. She co-authored a monograph entitled English Medium Instruction in Multilingual and Multicultural Universities, Academic Voices from the Northern European Context, together with B. Henriksen and A. Holmes, and published an edited volume entitled Integrating Content and Language in Multilingual Higher Education, with S. Dinovo. She is currently working on a book entitled The Evolution of EMI Research in European Higher Education, with co-authors A. Molino and S. Imova and S. Larson, to be published later this year. She has served as a board member for the ICLE Association as a TIRF trustee. Currently, she's president-elect for TESOL International Association. With no further ado, please welcome Dr. Joyce Kling and these plenary collaborative tools for language exchange.
Thank you so much for what a lovely introduction. I'm so pleased to be able to be here. if only virtually. I want to start by thanking a few individuals before I begin. Many thanks to the entire organizing committee and the team for the conference. Everything has been so smooth from the invitation until this moment. I need to particularly thank Dr. Gloria Ulloa. Gloria and I met in St. Petersburg, Russia, several years ago at a Department of State sponsored event. And it's wonderful to be able to work together again. But I also want to thank the US State Department for their generous sponsorship of this event. The program looks so interesting, and I'm confident that you're all going to have a stimulating event. So I will share my slides with you. And you confirm, Diego, can you just nod if you can see my slides? All set, okay. So again, thank you for the invitation. And I just thought that I would start by giving a quick geographic note of where I am. I am originally from the United States, but I've been living in Copenhagen, Denmark for just about 25 years now. And as you can see, Denmark's here in the north of in Scandinavia. And while Denmark has a reputation for being the happiest place on earth and having good restaurants, we do not have warm weather. And so it's 8:30 at night and it's cold and rainy, and we're hovering just about freezing. So right now I'm living vicariously through all of you and thinking of your sunshine, and I can feel your warmth coming through the screen. So I'll pretend that I'm with you in person right now. You'll notice in my template from my slides, there's an S here, and that's from the US State Department slides for the specialist program. So don't let it confuse you in terms of what's on the screen. So today I'm going to walk you just really quickly through the plan of what I'm going to talk about for the next hour or so. I'm going to be talking about insecurities and experiences, both my own and my colleagues, particularly related to teaching English under COVID-19. The shift to teaching online highlighted not only IT challenges, but a new range of personal insecurities that they surfaced stemming from having to work under new and challenging conditions. And English teachers found that they had to reinvent themselves, teach through platforms they had never heard of in conditions that were often not the best. And so I want to talk about aspects of change and innovative practice, and then look at some concrete examples from cases from around the world to look at this innovative practice. And then I'll wrap up my talk with some thoughts about how we move forward, hopefully, when you all get back to face-to-face instruction in the classroom. I will let you know, I have actually been teaching in person all semester. I finished a class about an hour ago for an evening course, and we have concerns of what's coming down the road this week alone, if we will be sent home again. But there is life after being at home. You do get to come out of the house again at some point, and it is lovely to be with the students again. But let's focus on the situation at hand right now, right? So I know you're still at home, but I want to just take you back to March 2020, about a year and a half ago. And I want you to think about, in my world, it was March 11th. And from what I understand in Honduras, it was the 16th. And these dates, they're in our head. And you can see here in my calendar, I have a circle. March 11th was a really busy day. If I look at all the colors on my screen, and I had to finish prepping my class for the next day. And I was getting all that news on television. I had this busy day, and I started thinking, I have to go to the supermarket, but I should really finish preparing my class. So what won over preparing my class? I did not go to the supermarket. Big mistake. Because when I went home that evening on television, our prime minister was holding what became one of many press conferences to update the public about the pandemic, but this time was different because she was announcing our stay-home orders and she was closing the borders. Well, like all of you, I got questions. What does this mean? How long is this going to go on? I thought, well, it's a good thing I finished preparing my lesson, because now I'm just going to post it on the online learning platform for my students. Everything will be fine, because I thought, well, I'm sure I can manage for a couple of weeks, right? What's a couple of weeks? Well, a couple of weeks have turned into quite a long time, but that's beside the point. What happened when I posted my slides was I wrote a note to the students online and said, I'll be in the classroom online and feel free, let's talk. But then no students showed up. Not surprising, because they didn't know what was going on either. And this is when it started to hit all of us. I'm going to need to have to reassess what I'm doing. Okay. So now it's been 2 years, and speaking to my colleagues over the past few weeks as I've prepared for this, I can tell you that there are stories of uncertainty and doubt as everybody was trying to figure out, and you can reflect on your own experiences. I want to introduce you to a couple of my colleagues and share some of their thoughts. My first colleague is Sophie, and Sophie is an experienced English language lecturer. She's taught for over 20 years, and she works as an English language consultant specializing in English for academic purposes for our undergraduate students. And at the time of the stay-home order, she was teaching a presentation skills class for international exchange students at our university. Now, Sophie's somewhat of a self-proclaimed a technophobe, or in other words, a person who typically avoids new technology if she can, right? So she found herself in the same position as everyone else, and she said to me, well, since a course on learning how to present and speak in public is a hands-on skill-based activity, I was confronted with two relevant questions. Does the subject as presentation technique lend itself to online teaching? And if yes, what would I be able, under the circumstances, would I be able to continue teaching my course online? She had really strong concerns, because when she started teaching online, the university's recommendation was to keep your course as true to the face-to-face teaching as possible. And she told me she felt completely unprepared and uncomfortable with the technology, with Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Remember when these were new concepts to us? And actually, she decided not to meet with her students for the first couple of weeks. And she was just sending message after message to these students. In an effort to overcompensate for her insecurity, she said she used far more time trying to reach out to the students and overloaded them with all sorts of written information, creating more engaging communication and giving them detailed feedback on things. She says, and I quote, "I felt a complete novice using Zoom and all the other programs to organize meetings online with larger groups of people, and I felt anxious that I was going to fail online because of my lack of technological knowledge. So I opted in my last lessons to post all the information online, but with the experience I have now, I realized I would do that in a different way." So here we have a very experienced teacher telling us about her insecurities. So now I want to introduce you to Emile. And Emile is a new teacher. He's an early career English teacher. He's currently completing his English master's degree. And at the time of the lockdown, he was teaching in an after-school support program. His students were students who weren't doing very well in school, and their parents had motivated them to go to an after-school program. Well, he said the first thing that happened in his school was they just shut the doors. So he didn't have an income and he didn't have any students. And it was after a couple months. Now, again, in Scandinavia, we went back to the classroom before they sent us home for a second time. So he did get a chance to meet with the students, but when he was sent back online last fall, he said his biggest problem was really engagement. And his quote to me was, which I thought was quite humorous, was that the students were suddenly very chill about time. And what he means by this is sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. When they came, sometimes their camera was on, sometimes it wasn't. They'd come in 20 minutes late, and maybe not, they would be engaged. And he really struggled to work with them on their fluency and on their accuracy, because his students lacked motivation. They had lacked motivation in face-to-face teaching. So now he was struggling with, how do I engage them when they're not motivated to be here? Their school day didn't change. They were sitting in their bedroom going to school, and now they were supposed to go to after school, sitting in the same chair, eating the same snacks. So he moved away from what he was trying to do in a program to just getting them to try to talk, just getting them to try to turn on their cameras. What we see is a sense of insecurity. There's this state or anxiety, a feeling of self-doubt, this lack of having the protection of what we already know. And suddenly we were confronted, and these are icons that we all know now, but we didn't know a year and a half ago. Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, WhatsApp, how to do voiceovers. You name it, anything goes. And suddenly we were all supposed to learn this in a very short time. Well, I want to touch on, with these insecurities, a little bit of what we would call fact or fiction. And the first statement that I want to mention is this idea that we were all teaching online or doing online teaching. And I've been saying for a number of months now, we've all been teaching online, right? But online education is a really complex endeavor. When we're doing online teaching, it's important to set realistic and understanding expectations of how we can support learning and how we can support our students under the coronavirus measures. And all of us, we lacked the training. We lacked the training for learning, for teaching, for figuring out how to design our course. My slide's going the wrong way. I posit that we were teaching online. We were not doing online, or we still aren't doing online teaching. Online courses, they involve a team of experts that include academics and instructional designers and programmers and illustrators. We have these massive online courses, these MOOCs. This is what online teaching is. When we're asked to just teach online, our insecurities bubble up because we're not really trained for that. But we had this quick transition. The second myth that I thought about was the fact that the students are digital natives. We hear this all the time. They know what they're doing. They were born with phones in their hands. My own children, who are now 18 and 20, the first thing they played with was the phone. They probably did more with the alphabet on one of these than they did with the pencil in the early years of their lives. But to say that they are digitally literate is another story. We're asking them to participate in teaching online that we're doing and just know how to work with these different formats. Well, the fact that a student can use a smartphone is very different. There are significant differences between looking at slides on a projected screen and knowing how to manipulate a breakout room or any of those things compared to what's going on a handheld device. Even just scrolling through documents on the phone is very different. And just this semester, our university came to us and told us, by the way, when you set up your courses in the learning platform, make sure that they can be read on a phone. That's very much outside my purview. I don't know if it can be read on a phone. I have enough trouble just figuring out how to teach it online, right? So the students, they know how to use their digital devices for social media, for texting, for YouTube, but there is a difference between using your phone or using your iPad or your laptop for information that's delivered in a lesson. And so I would argue that no, students that are digital natives are not necessarily digitally literate. So this left us with very strong challenges regarding engagement, regarding inequities, inequities that I understand are currently in place in Honduras in terms of access to the internet or access to machineries versus no access out in the countryside, maybe not having your own device. And there was kind of a sink or swim attitude going on. And basically a push for everyone being motivated and told, you have to be willing to try. We're all in this together. But we still have generations, young people who are trying to succeed in less than excellent circumstances. So I want to transition a little bit because our insecurities are based. We can kind of think about what we bring as language teachers when we come to our classrooms. And I have no doubt that everyone who's visiting us tonight feels relatively secure about their content knowledge. You are English language teachers and you have the ability to use the language and analyze the language and teach the language. And you also have aspects of pedagogic knowledge. You know how to teach the English language. You've gone through teacher training programs. But a third type of knowledge, this technological knowledge, this is what's been required of us over the past 2 years. And this knowledge of how technology should be used in this content domain. And as these morph together, we can see that what we really need is a technological, pedagogical content knowledge. This sweet spot in the middle that's very hard to achieve when some days we're just struggling with our pedagogical content knowledge. How am I going to teach that particular structural point or this particular function or get people motivated? Or I can figure out the technology and the pedagogy, but I'm not really sure how it's going to play with my language aspects. So this is an area of why the insecurities are there. What are we going to do about this? And what we have to think about of how we're going to continue to teach. So I want to present to you some teacher cognitions, some thoughts that were represented out of a recent study from China. Okay, we have some researchers who put forward an article called Teacher Learning in Difficult Times, examining English foreign language teachers' cognitions, their thoughts, their mental processes about online teaching to tide over COVID-19. And in this recently published study, 3 language teachers in northern China were asked to respond to these 2 questions. What are the language teachers' cognitions or thoughts about online learning? And how did the teachers acquire this online content and technological literacy in the initial stages in those first few months? So through a thematic analysis in the research, the researchers looked at, found that the teachers had really clear thoughts about the features and about the advantages and the constraints of their online EFL teaching, and that they had acquired information and communication technology, ICT. They acquired this literacy through understanding the students' learning needs. And I want to emphasize that, the learning needs about their online teaching practices and the necessity of integrating traditional classroom teaching methods with their online delivery. But these 3 teachers had very different thoughts about this experience, some of them positive and some of them negative. One of the teachers, she was going by the name Jane, she was very experienced. She had 18 years experience, but she found it very difficult to do this teaching. She worried about the students' lack of participation and the limited fulfillment of the teaching, of the learning outcomes. So she felt the students, their success was very much going to be relying on their self-management and their own metacognitions, and she didn't know how to access this. The other 2 teachers had more positive views. They thought that being online was very beneficial. They even thought the fact that the students could turn off the cameras gave an advantage to get people to try to talk without feeling that they were being looked at. And so they thought that this could be a help in a conversation class, for example. And they also thought that if they posted videos, the students could listen to them over and over and they would get more practice. Regardless of whether they thought positive or negative, all 3 teachers expressed that they experienced anxiety at the start. And this was mostly due to this lack of technical and pedagogic content knowledge. And regardless, the teachers reported they had successfully achieved learning how to use how to use the technology, but they still had this anxious feeling because we were being asked to do something that we really didn't have the training to do, right? So with all these insecurities and training, how have we come so far? There have been some interesting changes or innovations because it was time for a change. And so I offer you this picture on the screen, this young man here, who's listening to what we'll now call a Sony Walkman, right? So we have this picture because I want you to kind of think back. Well, I was a young student in the late 70s, but when the first Sony Walkman came out, right? The idea of strapping 2 speakers to your head and carrying around a portable stereo, it seemed ridiculous. People didn't do this, right? The original Walkman, it really wasn't as much a breakthrough in technology. Of course, the technology was there and we had to figure out how to make the units so small, but it wasn't the technology that was so amazing. It was a breakthrough in imagination, right? This was this accidental success. At the time, the Sony co-founder, he wanted to be able to listen to music on long flights on an airplane. And so he went to his team and said, make me something that I can carry with me, that I can have a small headphone. There was actually an option to speak to people, but they took it out because they didn't think people would ever use it. The pause button that we so rely on now to stop the headphones. But before the Walkman, the idea of walking around, listening to music or listening to the radio, it wasn't something we did. Headphones were heavy and you sat in a chair and listened to a large speaker, because walking around with headphones on was seen as very rude or antisocial. Now it's acceptable behavior. And it's this change. It revolutionized the way we think about music. But would you have accepted it if someone had come to you and said, we're going to do this? Over the course of the next few days, you're going to be presented with a number of innovative ideas, activities for your curriculum and classroom. Your colleagues are going to be presenting activities that they've developed for their students. Which ideas are you going to adopt? Which one are you going to shelf because it seems a little bit too far out? Which ones are you just going to toss aside? These are things that we have to think about if we're ready for change. And there are several factors that lead to this decision. We're all faced with this daunting task of trying to be innovative in a very hectic time in this environment where there isn't a lot of time for anything other than business as usual. I'm going to teach online. I'm not sure it's online teaching, but I'm going to do what I know how to do because I don't have time for change, right? We're just trying to put the fires out. But there are questions that can help us increase how we spot a good idea and what's going forward. Okay? When we look at definitions for curricular change, we see that change doesn't necessarily mean doing something differently. It can mean a change in awareness. A change can be an affirmation of current practice. Change is not necessarily immediate or complete. Indeed, some changes occur over time with the collaborator serving only to initiate the process. Some changes are directly accessible by the collaborator and therefore quantifiable, where others are not. Some types of change can come to closure while others are open-ended. This is a quote from 1989, and it's as applicable today as it was then when we're thinking about curricular change. So if that's change, what's innovation? Okay. I looked up on the UNICEF page to try to see how they're, in this current period of time, defining innovation. And according to UNICEF, we see in this slide that it says innovation in education means solving a real problem in a new, simple way to promote equitable learning. And of course, that's the goal we're all trying to achieve right now. Okay. We also have this quote, again from 1997, Marquis says, curricular innovation is a managed process of development whose principal products are teaching and/or testing material, methodological skills, and pedagogical values that are perceived as new by potential adopters. So they're ideas, they're innovations, they're activities that people feel that they can adopt, but how do we get there? And I offer you this model, a model of going through innovation through a few steps, where the core elements of successful innovation are what we're going to call understanding, ideation, innovation, and implementation. And I want to just walk through some of these. Okay. Defining the core issue allows you to develop and simulate and evaluate solutions. Again, when I say defining the issue, an essential element of all innovation is the ability to ask the right question that defines the core issue. Okay. I want to go back to the business world for a second and think about, we talked about the Sony Walkman. The question was, how can I listen to music in a public space without bothering people? I'll shrink the elements and then I can walk around with it. Thus, we have the Walkman. I'm going to give you a few more ideas that were more questions in understanding the problem for elements that are in your life today. Okay? You can guess what the company is. The question was positive. Why is the postal service, why does the mail, why is it so slow and inflexible? And we end up with a company like FedEx. They can overnight things to us immediately because the question was, why is the postal system so slow? Years back, photography started 100 years before the Polaroid photo, the one that you can see immediately. The reason the Polaroid became developed was because the man who was the founder of Polaroid, his daughter said, "Daddy, why can't I see the picture right away?" Within a year, you had the Polaroid picture because the technology was there, but the idea wasn't. The innovation needed to be sparked by understanding what the question was. I'm assuming that in Honduras, you have the Pringle potato chip. Is that right? The ones that come in the can? Well, the question was, how come the potato chips are always broken? Right? You get a bag of potato chips, they're always broken. So someone understood the question. I'll put them in a canister and they won't be, right? Why does my chocolate always melt in my hand? M&Ms, they put candy around it and they use the slogan, it melts in your mouth and not in your hand. Defining the problem is key to understanding how you're going to move forward. And that leads us to this aspect of ideation. That's what sparks us to start to brainstorm and think. I have to do something different. I don't have to do something unique. I just need to build on someone else's idea. Deferring judgment. And you've all heard when we're brainstorming, there are no right or wrong answers. It's so hard. We want there to be a right answer, but sometimes it's just an element that helps us move to the next stage, which is innovation. And in innovation, we can experiment and we can make evaluation and we can find the most successful idea, which leads to the implementation, making that idea come to fruition. That idea comes to life, right? So with this idea of how we run from understanding through ideation, through innovation, and to implementation, we still think, but why is it so difficult? Why is it so hard to innovate? Much of the time, this is because we're working through concepts of whether or not something is just development or business as usual, right? As I mentioned, you're coming to this conference for professional development and you want to hear opportunities. And when you're listening to some of these speakers in the rooms and in breakout rooms, you're going to think, that's a great idea. I really want to try that. And when you get back to your class in your Zoom room or in your WhatsApp room or whatever it is, sometimes it can be hard to break away from business as usual and the daily demands. Another aspect is process skills versus model skills. And as teachers, we have to come to terms with the fact that we work with innovation, that it's a process and we're not going to always know what the outcome is. And we have to trust the process. But we might have a lack of perspective. And this goes very much to my first question of saying, well, I can handle a couple of weeks, right? I'll figure it out. I really wanted to stay in business as usual. I didn't want to have to push my boundaries and learn a whole range of technological skills. I was very closed-minded about it. We have to open up to new ideas and accept that maybe not all. Remember, if we go back to that citation about change, it doesn't have to be the whole package, maybe just a bit. Could have been that also that people are just scared. And the third point is about attitude and organizational culture. Research shows that organizational cultures mainly are impacted by motivation, and this promotes individual learning. But if our organizational culture tells us to maintain business as usual, remember Sophie told me the university had asked her to make her course match her in-person courses as much as possible. Because she was trying to work in an organizational culture that reined her in, she wasn't able to move beyond. Months later, they started really promoting how to use the hybrid classroom and how to use more tools. But the organizational culture was restricting her from thinking about how to innovate. I want to offer you some guiding principles. I have 9 guiding principles of how we can start to accept change and innovation. Well, the first one is that for change to get underway, there has to be an educational need on the political agenda. Well, check. That's what this whole pandemic has taught us from the beginning. So we know that that's in place. There also needs to be a rational argument. A rational argument alone will not bring about change. Okay, it's not good enough that we say we want to make change. We want to have a new curriculum. We want it to be more communicative. Well, that in itself isn't going to get teachers to do that. If they're comfortable teaching a structural curriculum, they may stay there because a rational argument alone doesn't bring about change. Individuals need to experience the change personally. I mentioned you're going to listen to conference presentations this week and see that someone else succeeded, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to reach out and do it yourself. You have to experience it to find out if it's going to work for you. Okay? The intentions of proponents of curricular change will frequently be misunderstood. Okay? We have a saying here in Scandinavia, and it falls under what they call the Jente law, the law of Jente, which is don't think you're anything special. Stay within your own boundaries. Don't do anything out of the norm. Right? Very often, innovators are considered dangerous because maybe they're going to change the boundaries, and I'm not ready for that. Right? The social and political climate in which change takes place will significantly affect the extent of implementation. And again, we're living in unprecedented times, so many of these principles are already being enacted. Curricular implementation requires adequate support and coordination, which means that we need to know that our institutions are providing us with the tools and with the materials we need. And that may include teacher training beyond the regular typical requirements. Successful change requires a positive professional atmosphere. Welcome to this conference, and we couldn't be in a better place. Change has to be supported by ongoing professional development. Again, welcome to this conference, professional development. And the last thing is that innovation needs local advocates. So you need to have a team of people who are working with you in order to make it happen. So now I've run through some aspects of insecurity and anxiety and talked about innovation and change and how we get there. And what I'd like to share with you now are a couple of case studies. One from Senegal in West Africa, and one from here in Denmark, where I'm sitting, okay, in these 2 areas, which couldn't be more different, right? The onset of the stay-at-home orders from around the world, they put people into decision-making processes where they had to really reevaluate what education means. And because we were in a situation where our governments and ministries of education were at a loss for what to do, This really was a time that called for innovative thinking. We've never had a situation like this globally where the governments were also surprised and change wasn't happening through a regular course. So I want to share these two scenarios, two very different responses to the pandemic, one from a top-down decision-making process and one from a bottom-up decision-making process. Okay. We're going to go to Senegal in West Africa. Okay. And when the pandemic forced closure, people were at a loss, right? There was really, the government had just sent everybody home and they didn't really make any move for a while. For a couple months, nothing was going on. And then individual teachers, people who were in situations where they were teacher trainers, began to take some initiatives on their own first, reaching out to those parts of the country where there was no internet access, where people didn't have access to computers or to YouTube or any of these different areas. And I want to tell you some of the things that my colleague, Mawa Saab, who's a member of the TESOL Board of Directors, shared with me about what he started doing as a teacher trainer in his own community, where he was collecting handouts that had grammar activities and lesson plans, things about functions and notions and language teaching, and getting these all together and making lots of copies and taking them out to the remote areas so that they could be used and reused by the students and by their families. And he was doing what he could with the resources and realizing that the phone, again, and WhatsApp was their lifeline. This was the way that they were communicating. And so after a couple months, I mentioned, the government came back on board and they needed to realize that the country was basically homeschooling now. The kids were going to be home, nothing was going to change, and they had to figure out how to reach the communities when equity to the internet was not enough. People didn't have access. And they came up with the slogan, school is closed, but learning goes on. And this is where change became innovation. They had some tools, technology was in place. And though they realized that some things could go on online, particularly at the universities, they were going to have more success by working through text messaging, through SMS, on WhatsApp, but by really reaching out through television and radio, and ultimately putting these recordings on a dedicated YouTube channel. Some of this might sound familiar to some of you in communities where you have done the same, right? And you can see in the pictures that they were on TV sets and young students learning at home, right? And while the format seemed like a great idea, the teachers weren't prepared. Again, teachers knew how to teach in class. They didn't have training to put together how to teach on television. It became very obvious that they had recruitment difficulties. The teachers who may have been very dynamic didn't necessarily want to be on television, and they didn't know how to be on television. And there were very strict requirements, but they were trained and they got a cohort of teachers together. First, the English language teachers, because they wanted them to be models. They thought the English language teachers could put together lesson plans and show how they could be taught. They needed to know how to use PowerPoint. Not all their teachers knew how to use PowerPoint. They had to use a specific color scheme, which of course had to have this green screen so it could be projected on television. They had to have very specific formatting and font size. And more specifically, and this is where the change occurred, they used it as an opportunity from the Ministry of Education to move away from a structural syllabus to a communicative confidence syllabus that they had been trying to put together for years. Again, go back and think about what are the principles required for change. They could focus these lessons on functional language because it was more dynamic and it was something they could do in a television setting. And this was accessible for students at all levels. And it was also accessible and inclusive for parents and relatives who could be receiving these text messages, who could work with their students, with their children, and help each other so that they could move forward. Okay, so what we see is that while the technology became a change, offering English language training over radio waves or on television or on YouTube, the real innovation was the curricular change and the chance for competence development for teacher training. It was a push, and all of the elements were in place that allowed the teachers to get a sense of ownership and identity, and it pushed them out of their business as usual and the traditional teaching methods that were in place, and they started to change and move out of the structural syllabi. And the students were able to start learning the mechanics of the language, not only structurally, but they could work on fluency and on communication skills. And because of this, the teachers could implement more communicative language teaching and motivate the students to work more fluently. Also as role models by standing up in front of everyone in the country, and also for the other teachers who were going to have to follow teaching other courses, right? So innovation, yes, the technology was a big change, but the innovation took place in the language teaching classroom. Okay. So we move from there to Denmark. Denmark is a rich country. We are very fortunate. We are not lacking in much. We are, as I mentioned, one of the happiest places on earth by whatever standards those surveys take. People here are not lacking in material things. They have access to computers. If they don't, the municipalities make sure that they get access. They get access to the internet. But stay-at-home demands still put new demands on students. It didn't change that they were still sitting in their homes. In many cases, while they might have access to all the equipment, there might have only been one computer in a home for 2 or 3 children, or they didn't necessarily have a space to be working. And all of the education was going on online. And we could see as time went on that the motivation for both the teachers and the students was really starting to wane. And a great focus in the teacher education for language teaching, there's all these theories about language and theories about language learning and aspects of curricular development and questions of method. But over and over, we've been reminded that the daily habits of our students have changed, their motivations and their increased awareness right now of well-being and mindfulness and learning goals and strategies. And regardless of their language learning as we define it, whether it was offline or online, without the benefit of the face-to-face classes and the motivation that they gained from their teacher and from their peers, the students were at a loss of how to progress in their language learning. Tests and exams were hanging over their heads, and the need to demonstrate achievement, this had been a challenge for the students while they were in face-to-face, but now it was very much a struggle for those who were on their own. So some colleagues of mine started experimenting with this aspect of language coaching. What's language coaching, right? Is it just teaching? Isn't that what we do? Well, there is actually an international association for language coaches. And the quote here that you see on the right is how they're defining that language coaching is a learner-led process aimed at creating optimal target language acquisition while working toward effective international communication skills in order to reach future related goals. What does that mean? That's a lot to say. What it basically means is that the objective of a coach is to process, of the coaching process, it's to assist the learner in self-reflection and critical evaluation of their language usage, as well as assist them in defining and using tools they need. It's to help them learn how to learn, right? Language coaching becomes a conversation-based process for the purpose to map and create optimal language acquisition or language usage related goals. The framework is based on strategies where we use intrinsic motivation and develop learning awareness, where both the teacher, the coach, and the client, the students are engaged, and that these students, they take ownership, right? So with this in mind, you all have students, and very often they'll say, I just want to be able to do this, or I should be able to do that. But at times, these learner cognitions, their own thoughts about it, they might be unrealistic of what they want to achieve in a short period of time or to reach an exam. And they might not actually believe in themselves enough to accept that they can do this, and they'll just quit. They want to do things much faster. And so when a student says, I want to be better in English, we have to be able to ask them some questions. And the questions that we start to ask them with coaching is for them to think to themselves, well, what can I already do? Right? I can do this. Again, those positive statements, not what you can't do, but what can you do, right? How do I learn best? Do I learn best watching YouTube videos? If so, then let's go there and see what's going on. What are my goals? I'm getting a C or a 70% right now. While I know I'd like to get 100%, maybe 80% would be my goal. Right? What are my options? What can I do? And what are the challenges in place? And the traditional classrooms have assignments, and there is a great deal of washback in terms of teaching towards national tests and professional demands. But with a coach, the student can concretize their goals and define what they want to do. Okay? So we look and we realize that this coaching is based on having a specific goal in place. And this goal works with the question, maybe, yes, what does the learner want to achieve, right? And we're asking that because it's in school, usually it's not asked. In school, students are told what they have to achieve. You need to do this. You need to write this paper. You need to get this done, right? This whole process is set in what is called a SMART system. And this has been a part of the coaching system for a while, that coaching is based on SMART, that things should be specific, that we know exactly what the students' goals are going to be, and they're defined, and they can tell us what they want to do, what the what is and the why of their goal. Because for the first time, this may be the first time that anyone has asked them what they want to do with the language, right? The next part is that it has to be measurable, okay? The student has to identify some criteria that tells us that they've attained their goal. And this will be defined, this is defining the how. How are they going to achieve their goal? How, I say to a student, how are you going to know when you've reached your results? How are you going to verify this? And it might be by saying on the next test, I'm going to get 85% correct, or a B, or whatever your grading system is, right? It has to be achievable. And I'm going to ask the student in a coaching situation, is it possible for you to achieve your goal, right? Can you do this path? Can you reach a path for accomplishment? And here you're asking to set in the who in this goal setting. Who is going to help you? How are you going to know you do this? What's going to be your achievable factor? Okay? It has to be relevant, the R, and it has to be realistic. And this has to be, the student has to be willing to work and see where it's going to go. And they have to identify where this goal is going to take them. And the last one is very important in that it has to be time bound. They have to be able to say when they're going to do something. We get students who say, I'm going to learn 10 new words every day, right? That's my goal. So, well, is that achievable? Is that actually relevant to what you have to do? And do you have time to do that every day? Because maybe you can do it once a week. You're going to learn 3 new words, and you're just going to figure out how you're moving. So we work under SMART, a SMART model with the goals. And with those goals, we need it to also have a reality. We need to know what the learner's current situation is, what's going on in their lives. When they say they want to watch a series of films, do they have access to a computer or a television in that period where they can actually watch and study, maybe with subtitles, without subtitles, in the target language, not in the target language, without being disturbed by other people in their family under COVID, for example? What's really possible in their situation? And the last question is, what is the learner going to do? This is the GROW model: goal, reality, option, and will. What are they going to do? Right. So we were working here in Copenhagen. I had the opportunity to work with a series of teachers, language teachers, not just English, but also French and German, which is taught at a significantly lower level here. The Danish young people, they achieve a very high level of English proficiency quite early in their education, but there were still those who needed the coaching. And teachers found that their language coaching became an active guidance, but they struggled. They struggled because as language teachers, they wanted, when the student said, I'm having a hard time with X or Y, they wanted to teach it to them. And instead they had to change hats. They had to stop explaining specific linguistic points or specific pragmatic issues, or even aspects of literature analysis or translation. Stop explaining these things and simply ask questions that would guide the students for them to realize how they could do it themselves. So the starting point for the coaching really was that each person is an expert in their own life, and the students are experts in the process. And as the coaches, we believe that the students could formulate their own goals and put it together. Now, what the teachers were putting together for the students was essentially a plan, like you see here on the left, where they would talk about priority areas. So when a student would come and say, I want to be able to read an entire novel this semester. Okay, well, what's your priority? Is it the novel, or you want to read a story by yourself, or you want to learn these vocabulary terms on your own? What are your objectives? And then what are the strategies that you're going to use? Tell me about, again, those questions of what can you do already? What sort of strategies might you need to learn about before you move on? And most importantly, where the coaches, the language coaches, were coming in, was to talk about resources. Because this was an area where the students believed they really wanted to work, but they didn't know how to go about it. And what you see here on the right, it's a little bit, blurry. I covered it up for the teacher, but we have a teacher who put together an online page on what we call Padlet, just documenting areas where students could go in and find access information for grammar and vocabulary, access information about listening activities in the language that they wanted to do, both guided listening activities and also more extensive authentic language that they could listen to. Access activities for reading, listening and reading, speaking, and also more challenging, maybe online programs where students could work together so that they could start doing things on their own and think about concrete digital and analog tools for language learning. Because if the students were experts in their own life and experts in motivating themselves for doing the other things, they needed to find out how they could do this. In the high school, these goals, they were small individual steps towards the students finding their own way in the overall curriculum, and then linking back these strategies to the actual classroom work that they had to do. And our tasks then at the language, as language coaches for that particular group, was to support them in this process and ask reflective questions. Okay. At the end of this trial period, this new innovative change, some of the teachers were asked what they felt about this activity. And one of the strongest comments that came out of this was that the teachers themselves said, language coaching has made me more aware of my students' needs. Okay. That's really strong, because this was a bottom-up initiative to try to figure out why were students losing motivation, why students weren't engaged, why students who appeared motivated and seemed to do all the homework still weren't achieving. And very often it was not understanding what skill a student was bringing with them, what skills the students weren't bringing with them, and being able to ask the students questions. And there's one teacher from a school called Vestine, and it was an adult education center actually for high school students looking to complete their degrees. The teacher said, I got insight into language learning from a different angle at eye level. I could look the student in the eye, and I found I was able to talk to them on their own terms. And this was very insightful, right? As the language coaching proceeded and more was going on online, the teachers started to get together pairs of students who could work together in tandem and have coaching sessions with each other and work together in dialogues and talk to each other. And again, students who previously in class refused to speak had a safe place where they could discuss with somebody something that they tried, a new change, an innovative activity for the student that they could share and go through all those processes as students and accepting that change could lead to innovation and perhaps achievement that they hadn't experienced before. So we've basically then seen two case studies, one with a very top-down initiative and one with a bottom-up initiative, leading to very often the same result, which is this new awareness of where we're going, right? And it wasn't necessarily technological change. Technology provided the outlet for us to be able to do these things, whether it was on TV, on the radio, through SMS text, even through duplicating in paper, or whether it was through a simple conversation. But what the change was, curricular changes and ways that we think about what teaching is. Okay? So the conditions for innovation to occur had to be there was a feasibility. Could the innovation be implemented? And under these conditions, with proper training and support, we found that it could be. Was it acceptable? Was there acceptability? With the question, does the innovation match the organization's style, philosophy, or culture? And is it relevant, right? Does the innovation match the stakeholders' needs? Again, we go back to the idea that not all innovation needs to be a complete thought, but just small bits that we can build on each other and learn so that we can all walk around with stereo speakers strapped to our head and a reel-to-reel music player strapped across our hips, right? So the lessons learned here, there were potential shortcomings of the technology. We were all provided with technology for teaching online, but we maybe have lacked some of the online teaching skills. But over the course of time, we've been learning because we've had innovation that occurred due to desires to meet new defined needs. And this also provided aspects of collaboration at a much higher level. The English language teaching community has held together and supported each other, and teachers have participated in both formal and informal professional development and shared experiences in these developments in areas on Facebook and online and through WhatsApp groups, etc. And many of the new skills are going to be carried over as we re-enter the classroom and teach face-to-face. I don't believe we're leaving these at the door, and I can tell you from personal experience, having taught face-to-face this semester, I utilize a lot of the skills that I developed during the pandemic, technologically and also in person in my teaching. So our new normal has us drawing more and more on collaborative teaching and enhancing students' strategies and awareness as we begin to reevaluate our role as teachers in the student achievement. Collaborating, drawing on our communities of practice, top down, bottom up, and relying on our networks, right? At this point, I'm going to stop. I want to say thank you to everybody for listening. I have some references at the end that are available, but I think we have about 10 minutes. And so I am open to questions. I don't know if there have been questions in the chat, or maybe we have about 5 minutes, or if questions are coming through, but Diego, maybe you can help me out here.
Yes, Dr. Kling. Actually, we do not have any questions in the session. However, I just wanted to mention we do have some pretty good comments in our YouTube channel. So since this was a live plenary, I have to say that all of the attendees have been sharing extensively their experiences and the challenges they have faced while teaching during COVID-19. They have described the responses of their institutions towards online teaching and the multiple innovations they had to come up with. I mean, seriously, there has been such a relatable conference. Either as instructors or students, we can all relate to the scenarios you have pointed out.
Yeah, I think there might be an article or a book in there because it sounds like that there's a great deal. It's really the first time where globally we have all experienced the same thing, perhaps under different financial conditions or access to certain technologies. But at the heart of it, we've all faced the same thing. So.
Yes, for once, we were all on the same page.
Yes, for once. So, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me.
No, thanks to you. It has been a wonderful kickstart to our conference. Yes, and there are also some comments appreciating all of the concepts you have shared with us and the insights that you have provided. Yeah, this has been wonderful. So I think I have nothing else to add, but to thank you once again for this wonderful plenary. It has been a true pleasure to be here. And we can wrap it up here by encouraging the rest of the audience, our attendees, to follow the program. And please feel free to navigate around the various presentations we have in this 12th International Conference for Teachers of English Language Teaching during COVID-19. It has been a blast, and I know for a fact that it's going to be the same for the rest of the conference. Thank you, Dr. Kling, and dear audience, have a good one.